The council chamber floated in the heart of galactic space, a massive station where 17 alien civilizations gathered to decide the fate of worlds. Today, they gathered to decide the fate of humanity. Daeho Kim stood in the observation deck of the human flagship, watching the proceedings through a live feed. His uniform bore the marks of 30 years of service, but today those years meant nothing. The council had already made their decision before the trial even began. The Vulkrus ambassador raised its crystalline appendages, and the chamber fell silent. Its voice resonated through the translation systems, cold and absolute. Humanity has proven itself incompatible with galactic civilization. They adapt too quickly. They survive where they should perish. They question what should not be questioned. Daeho clenched his fists. The Rigel colony incident had been a rescue mission. When the station's life support failed, every other species had died within hours. The humans had survived for 3 weeks by converting the radiation shields into makeshift heating systems. They had saved themselves through ingenuity, and the galaxy had called it dangerous. Hygiene Park stood beside him, her face pale but composed. She had been with him since the beginning, his second-in-command and the finest tactical officer in the fleet. "They're afraid of us," she said quietly. "Not because we're violent, but because we don't quit." The Vulkrus continued. "We cannot allow a species to exist that thrives on chaos and uncertainty. Therefore, the Council votes to exile humanity to the Dead Zone. They will have 1 solar cycle to evacuate their worlds. Any human found outside the designated zone after that period will be eliminated." The vote was unanimous. 17 civilizations, some of whom humanity had called friends, all raised their assent. Earth and her colonies were to be emptied. 12 billion humans would be forced into the most inhospitable region of known space, where gravitational anomalies tore ships apart and resources were nearly impossible to extract. Daeho turned from the screen. "Begin the evacuation protocols. We have 1 year. The next 12 months were chaos." Every human ship, station, and vessel was converted into an evacuation transport. Families were torn apart as lottery systems determined who would go on which ship. Earth's great cities were abandoned, left as monuments to a civilization the galaxy wanted to forget. Daeho oversaw the largest evacuation in human history. The colony ships were not designed for such numbers. People lived in cargo bays, in corridors, in spaces that were never meant for habitation. But they lived. They endured. Hygiene coordinated the logistics, working 20-hour days to ensure every human had a place. She watched as museums were emptied, as libraries uploaded their entire contents to databanks, as children asked why they had to leave their homes. She had no good answers for them. The day of final departure arrived. Daeho stood on the bridge of the lead ship, watching Earth shrink behind them. The planet looked so peaceful from space, blue and green and perfect. He wondered if they would ever see it again. The journey to the Dead Zone took 3 months. The fleet moved slowly, carefully, every ship precious cargo carrying the last of humanity. Along the way, they passed Council patrol ships that watched but did not help. The message was clear. Humanity was alone now. When they reached the barrier zone, Daeho saw what the Council had condemned them to. The Dead Zone was a stellar graveyard, filled with collapsed stars and gravitational whirlpools that pulled light itself into spirals. Space here was twisted, broken, hostile to all life. "This is where we're supposed to die," Hyjin said, staring at the sensor readouts. "They've sent us to hell and called it mercy." But Daeho saw something else. He saw a challenge. He saw a possibility. If this place was truly dead, they wouldn't have needed to exile us here. They would have just killed us. They put us here because some part of them believes we might survive. And if we can survive, we can do more than that. The first colonies were nightmares. Ships were torn apart by gravity fluctuations. Supplies ran low. People died from exposure, from accidents, from despair. The first year in the dead zone claimed 2 million lives, but humanity adapted. Engineers learned to read the gravity patterns. Miners discovered that the very forces trying to kill them had compressed rare minerals into incredible densities. Physicists began to understand that the dead zone wasn't random chaos, but a complex system that could be predicted and eventually controlled. They established the first permanent settlement on a rogue planet caught between 3 gravity wells. It should have been impossible, but the location allowed them to tap into the gravitational forces for power. They called it New Haven, and it became the capital of humanity's exile. Hygiene organized the defense forces. The council had forbidden them weapons, but they had brought tools. Tools could be modified. Tools could be repurposed. Within 5 years, humanity had a small but capable defense fleet. Hidden among the asteroids and debris fields, as Deho looked out over New Haven's growing city, he made a promise to himself and to the 12 billion souls under his protection. The galaxy had exiled them to die. Instead, they would live. They would grow. And one day, they would return. The Council had made their greatest mistake. They had given humanity something to prove. 50 years had passed since the exile, and Minho Choi had never seen Earth. He was born in the dead zone, in a colony ship that had been converted into a permanent habitat. His parents told him stories of blue skies and oceans, but to Minho, home was the twisted void of gravitational chaos that surrounded their settlements. He worked as chief engineer at Station Gamma, one of the largest human outposts. Today, he was doing what the Council's best scientists had declared impossible. He was building a structure that floated on gravity itself. "The readings are stable," said his assistant, checking the monitors. "I still don't understand how this is working." Minho smiled. The Council thought the gravity wells were obstacles. They're not. They're tools. The currents flow in patterns. Once you learn the patterns, you can ride them. The construction platform hung suspended between 3 gravitational forces, each one strong enough to tear a ship apart. But Minho had calculated the exact point where those forces balanced. In that sweet spot, they could build without fighting against the crushing pressure. Across the dead zone, in Research Station Alpha, Soman Lee was making a different kind of breakthrough. She stood before a holographic display showing the gravitational map of their entire region. What had once looked like random chaos now showed clear patterns, like currents in an ocean. "We've been thinking about this wrong," she explained to her research team. "The Council sees gravity as something to overcome. But what if we work with it instead?" Her prototype device sat on a lab bench, a small sphere that glowed with soft blue light. When activated, it created a localized gravity field that could be shaped and directed. It was crude, barely functional, but it proved the concept. "If we can scale this up," Soman continued, "we can create gravity shields, gravity engines, even gravity weapons. The dead zone isn't our prison. It's our laboratory." One of her colleagues, an older scientist who had lived on Earth, shook his head in wonder. The Council spent 10,000 years developing gravity manipulation and never got this far. "We've done it in 50. They had safety regulations," Soman replied. "They had ethics committees and risk assessments. We have survival. Desperation makes for excellent motivation." The human settlements were spreading now, connected by what they called the void roads. These were carefully mapped routes through the gravity currents, where ships could travel safely. What the Council thought would isolate humanity had instead become a transportation network invisible to outside sensors. Minho oversaw the construction of the first gravity station, a massive platform that could generate its own gravitational field. It allowed them to create stable zones within the chaos, places where traditional construction methods could be used. Within months, 3 more stations were operational. Life in the dead zone was hard, but it was life. The third generation of exiles, the Voidborn, knew nothing but struggle and innovation. They didn't mourn Earth because they had never lost it. This harsh place was their home, and they were becoming something new. Children learned physics by watching asteroids dance through gravity wells. Engineers trained by building structures that shouldn't exist. Pilots navigated routes that would drive council navigators insane with their complexity. Humanity was evolving, adapting to an environment that was supposed to kill them. Someone's research team made another breakthrough when they discovered that the rare minerals compressed by the gravity wells had unique properties. One element, which they named voidite, could store and channel gravitational energy. It became the foundation of their new technology. Do you realize what this means? Someone asked Minho during a joint research session. We can build ships that don't just resist gravity but control it. We can create weapons that tear space itself. The council gave us the greatest gift imaginable, and they don't even know it. Minho nodded, examining the voidite sample. My construction teams can use this. We can expand faster, build bigger. New Haven could become a true city, not just a collection of habitats. The two of them worked together, combining her theoretical knowledge with his practical engineering. Within a year, they had designed the first true gravity ship, a vessel that moved by manipulating the space around it rather than using conventional engines. The test flight was a success. The ship moved through the dead zone's gravity wells like a dolphin through water, graceful and impossibly fast. Traditional ships struggled to survive here. This ship thrived. News of the breakthroughs spread through the human settlements. Hope, which had been in short supply, began to grow. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were advancing, building, creating things the galaxy had never seen. In the central chamber of New Haven, the settlement council met to discuss the future. Daho Kim, now elderly but still sharp, addressed the assembly. Our children have accomplished in 50 years what we thought would take centuries. The question now is, what do we do with this knowledge? Hyjin Park, serving as military coordinator, stood. We fortify. We expand. We prepare. The council thinks we're dead, and that ignorance is our greatest weapon. We use the time they've given us to become strong enough that they can never exile us again. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would continue its hidden expansion, building in the dark, growing in the void. They would take the prison the galaxy had made for them and transform it into a fortress. Minho and Soman continued their work, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Every day brought new discoveries, new applications of gravity technology. The dead zone, which was supposed to be humanity's grave, had become humanity's crucible. The Voidborn generation looked at the stars beyond their prison and felt no fear. They felt anticipation. They had been born in hell and made it home. What could the galaxy possibly do to them that was worse than what they had already survived? Nothing. And that realization made them dangerous. 100 years after the exile, Admiral Junho Bei commanded a fleet that did not officially exist. His ships hung in the deepest parts of the dead zone, invisible to council sensors. Armed with weapons that defied galactic understanding, he stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiance, watching the construction yards through the observation window. Dozens of warships were being built, each one incorporating a century of forced innovation. They were sleek, deadly, and completely hidden from the galaxy that had forgotten about humanity. Status report, Junho ordered. His tactical officer responded immediately. 67 combat vessels operational, another 40 in construction. All gravity drive systems are functioning at peak efficiency. Weapon systems are charged and ready. Junho nodded. The gravity drives allowed his ships to move through the dead zone's chaos like it was calm space. More importantly, they could use the gravitational anomalies as cover. hiding entire fleets where Council sensors showed only deadly emptiness. Meanwhile, in the research city of New Prometheus, Dr. Nari Han led humanity's technology division. A laboratory occupied an entire asteroid that had been hollowed out and converted into the most advanced research facility humanity had ever built. "Show me the weapon tests," she said to her assistant. The holographic display activated, showing footage of their latest creation. A small device, no larger than a person's fist, was launched at a derelict Council ship they had recovered decades ago. When activated, the device created a gravitational spike that crushed the ship into a sphere of compressed metal no bigger than a marble. "Portable gravity collapse weapon," Nari explained to the watching committee. "One person can carry it. One activation can destroy a building, a ship, or a bunker. The Council is nothing like this because their ethics laws forbid such weapons research." One of the committee members, an older woman who remembered Earth, looked troubled. "Are we becoming what they feared we would become?" Nari's expression hardened. "They feared we would survive. Everything else is their excuse. Besides, we're not building these weapons to attack. We're building them so that we never have to fear exile again." Across the sector, Commander Yuna Song led the reconnaissance division. Her ships operated at the very edge of the dead zone, carefully mapping Council territories without being detected. She had spent the last 5 years watching, learning, understanding the galaxy that had expelled humanity. "The Council has grown complacent," she reported during a secure communication with Junho. "Their patrol patterns are predictable. Their technology has barely advanced in the century since they exiled us. They believe themselves safe." Junho studied the star maps Yuna had compiled. "They've forgotten the most important rule of warfare. Never assume your enemy is dead unless you've confirmed the body." Yuna smiled coldly. "We've established observation posts in 17 systems along the border. They have no idea we're there. We know everything about their fleet movements, their trade routes, their military capabilities. They know nothing about us." The intelligence Yuna gathered was invaluable. Nari's research teams used it to ensure their technology stayed ahead of Council developments. Junho's military planners used it to identify weaknesses in Council defenses. Knowledge was power, and humanity was gathering both. Back in New Haven, now a sprawling city of 5 million people, the civilian population thrived. The harsh conditions that had killed so many in the early years were now routine obstacles that children learned to navigate. Schools taught advanced physics as basic curriculum. Engineers were trained from childhood to think in ways that would baffle Council scientists. The void-born generation had grown up and taken leadership positions. They had no emotional connection to Earth, no nostalgia for the past. They only knew the present, and they were determined to shape the future. NHO convened a meeting of the military command. Around the holographic table stood his finest officers, men and women who had trained their entire lives for a war that might never come. "We've spent a century preparing," he told them. "Our ships are superior. Our weapons are unmatched. Our soldiers are hardened by an environment that would kill Council troops in days. But we still wait." "Why?" Yuna answered. "Because we're not ready to show ourselves yet. Every year we wait, we grow stronger. The Council grows weaker through complacency. Time is our ally." Nari joined the meeting via hologram from New Prometheus. "I agree. My teams are close to breakthroughs in shield technology and faster than light communication. Give me another decade, and we'll have advantages the Council can't even imagine." Junho considered this. "Very well. We continue the expansion, but we accelerate the timetable. I want defense platforms established at every entry point to the dead zone. I want our fleet doubled in size. And I want absolute certainty that when we finally reveal ourselves, the Council will have no choice but to accept our terms. The preparations intensified. Construction yards worked around the clock. Research teams pushed themselves to exhaustion. Reconnaissance missions mapped every Council system within range. Humanity was building an empire in the dark, and no one in the galaxy suspected a thing. Nari made another breakthrough when her team successfully reversed and improved Council shield technology. The new shields could not only deflect energy weapons, but also redistribute kinetic impacts using gravity manipulation. A ship protected by these shields was nearly invulnerable. The Council ships use shields that stop energy, Nari explained. Our shields can stop anything and use the absorbed force to strengthen themselves. The harder they hit us, the stronger we become. Junho watched the demonstration with satisfaction. Just like humanity itself, Yuna's scouts reported something interesting. Council exploration ships were beginning to approach the dead zone's outer edges, though they stayed well clear of the dangerous areas. They seemed to be surveying, perhaps looking for new resources as their traditional mining operations depleted. They're getting desperate, Yuna noted. Resource scarcity is affecting several Council worlds. They're looking toward the dead zone because they've exhausted easier options. Junho saw the opportunity. Let them look. They'll see nothing but the chaos we want them to see. And when the time comes, their desperation will be our leverage. The human dominion, though unnamed and unrecognized, was real. It existed in the spaces between gravity wells, in stations that shouldn't function, in ships that moved like ghosts through impossible terrain. It was built on suffering, forged in exile, and tempered by a century of struggle. The galaxy had tried to erase humanity. Instead, it had created something far more dangerous, a civilization with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The question was no longer if humanity would return, but when and on what terms. That decision, Junho knew, would come sooner than anyone expected. 200 years had passed since the exile when the Kethral swarm emerged from dark space. The hive mind species consumed everything in its path, converting organic and inorganic matter into more of themselves. They swept through Council space like a plague, unstoppable and merciless. The Council's combined fleets engaged. The Kethral at the Battle of Outer Rim. It was a massacre. Council ships, designed for peacekeeping and light combat, were torn apart by Kethral bioships that regenerated faster than they could be damaged. 17 fleets went into that battle. Only fragments of 4 returned. In the Council chamber, panic reigned. The Velcris ambassador, descendant of the one who had condemned humanity, stood before the assembly. We need new strategies, new weapons, new allies. We need every advantage we can find. An older counselor, Italian, whose species had voted against the exile, spoke quietly. There is one option we have not considered. The dead zone borders Kethral-occupied space. If we could establish a buffer there, the dead zone is empty, the Velcris interrupted. Humanity died there centuries ago. We confirmed their extinction from our border scans. Did we? The Italian asked. Or did we assume what we wanted to believe? The Council voted to send an exploration fleet to the dead zone. 3 ships, heavily armed and shielded, approached the gravitational nightmare that had been humanity's prison. They expected to find ruins, debris, perhaps a few monuments to a dead civilization. Instead, they found New Haven. The city sprawled across an entire rogue planet, its towers reaching toward the twisted sky. Massive structures floated between gravity wells, connected by shimmering energy bridges. Ships moved through the chaos with impossible grace. And everywhere, there were humans, millions of them. The Council ships were detected immediately. Within minutes, they were surrounded by 30 human vessels that seemed to appear from nowhere. The human ships were sleek and deadly, and their weapons locked onto the Council vessels with casual efficiency. A transmission came through. Council ships, you are in sovereign human territory. State your purpose. The Council commander, a Vulcrus officer, struggled to form words. This is impossible. You should be dead. You should be extinct. We got better, came the reply. Now, state your purpose or leave. The Council ships were escorted to New Haven, where they met Chancellor Taiwan Yu, leader of the Human Dominion. He received them in a grand hall that put Council architecture to shame, with gravity-controlled platforms floating in impossible configurations. Taiwan was void-born, fifth-generation exile, and he looked at the Council representatives with eyes that held no warmth. My ancestors told stories about you, about how you sentenced us to death and called it justice. I assume you're not here to apologize. The Vulcrus ambassador tried to maintain dignity. The Council faces an existential threat. The Kethral swarm is consuming entire sectors. We request humanitarian assistance in evacuating populations from threatened worlds. Taiwan laughed, a sound without humor. Humanitarian assistance. You exiled 12 billion of us to die, and now you want humanitarian assistance. The irony is remarkable. We were wrong, the Tellian counselor said quietly. Some of us said so at the time, but what's done is done. The question is what happens now. Will you let billions die because of decisions made 2 centuries ago? Taiwan studied them for a long moment. No, we're not like you. We'll help, but not as a favor and not for free. We'll discuss terms. General Jiwan Kang commanded the Dominion military, overseeing a fleet of 500 warships that incorporated 2 centuries of innovation. When the Council explained the Kethral threat, she smiled like a predator scenting prey. We've studied your battle reports, she told the Council representatives. Your tactics are outdated. Your weapons are ineffective. Your ships are too slow. No wonder you're losing. The Vulcrus ambassador bristled. And I suppose humanity has better solutions? Jiwan activated a holographic display. We've fought the dead zone for 200 years. We've learned to weaponize gravity itself. Your Kethral bioships regenerate quickly, but they can't regenerate from being compressed into a singularity. She showed them footage of human gravity weapons in action. The Council representatives watched in horror and awe as entire asteroid fields were crushed into points of infinite density, as ships were torn apart by localized gravitational spikes, as shields absorbed attacks and converted the energy into devastating counterstrikes. This is beyond anything we imagined possible, the Tellian whispered. You had imagination, Jiwan replied. We had necessity. There's a difference. The Dominion fleet deployed to meet the Kethral at the contested frontier. The Council had evacuated the sector, writing it off as lost. They expected the humans to slow the Kethral advance at best, maybe buy time for more evacuations. They did not expect what happened next. The Kethral swarm numbered in the thousands, their bioships vast and terrible. They had consumed 17 civilizations and showed no sign of stopping. When the human fleet arrived, the Kethral adapted their standard tactics, preparing to overwhelm through numbers and regeneration. G1 gave one order. Activate gravity surge weapons. Maximum dispersal. The human ships unleashed their primary weapons. Gravitational waves rippled through space, and the Kethral bioships began to collapse. They tried to regenerate, but you cannot regenerate from gravitational crushing. The fundamental forces of the universe were tearing them apart at a molecular level in 3 hours. The Kethral swarm at the contested frontier was reduced to debris. Not scattered, not damaged, but obliterated. 5,000 Kethral bioships, destroyed without a single human casualty. The Council watched the battle recordings in stunned silence. The Vulcrus ambassador's voice shook. You could destroy us. Any of us. All of us. Taiwan, present via hologram, nodded. Yes, we could. But we won't. We're not conquerors. We're survivors who got very good at surviving. Ji-Yuan's fleet continued forward, hunting down Kethral concentrations across 3 sectors. Every engagement ended the same way. Complete Kethral annihilation. The swarm, which had seemed unstoppable, retreated into dark space and was never seen again. Humanity had saved the galaxy. The same species the Council had tried to eliminate had become their savior. The irony was not lost on anyone. As the last Kethral bioship was destroyed, Taiwan sent a message to the Council. We've completed our contract. The Kethral are no longer a threat. Now, let's discuss the future. We have much to talk about. The Council had feared humanity would be dangerous. They were right, but not in the way they expected. Humanity was dangerous because they could not be broken, could not be stopped, and could not be ignored. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson 200 years in the making. The Council chamber had not changed in 200 years, but everything else had. The same 17 civilizations gathered, but now there was an 18th seat at the table. Humanity had returned, not as exiles begging for mercy, but as equals demanding recognition. High Executor Siam Wu Nam represented the human dominion. He was 6th generation Voidborn, tall and composed, with eyes that had never seen Earth but carried the weight of 2 centuries of exile. He stood before the Council with the confidence of someone who held all the power in the room. The Kethral are defeated, he began. Your civilizations are safe. Now we discuss compensation. The Vulcrus ambassador shifted uncomfortably. Compensation? We are grateful for your assistance, but Mussing, Xian Wu interrupted. You exiled us to die. We survived. You faced extinction, and we saved you. These are facts. Now comes the reckoning. The Telian counselor, who had opposed the exile from the beginning, spoke carefully. What does humanity want? Xian Wu activated a holographic document. The Dominion Accords. First, the exile is formally recognized as a crime against intelligent life. It will be recorded in galactic history as such. Second, humanity is granted full council membership with veto power over any decision regarding human affairs. Third, Earth and all former human territories are returned to human control. Impossible, the Velcris protested. Those territories have been settled by other species for 2 centuries. Then those species will relocate, Xian Wu replied coldly. Just as we were forced to relocate. Consider it a learning experience. Ambassador Era Shin, head of human diplomacy, took over. Her approach was softer but no less firm. We understand this is difficult. We're not unreasonable. The relocations will be gradual, over a 10-year period, and will provide transportation and resettlement assistance. We're offering more mercy than was shown to us. She continued, outlining the additional terms. Fourth, the 3 species who opposed our exile most strongly will receive preferred trading status and technology sharing agreements. Fifth, all council militaries will be subject to inspection by human observers to ensure no civilization ever has the power to exile another without consequence. The council erupted in protest. The idea of human oversight was humiliating to species who had considered themselves superior for millennia. But Era simply waited for the noise to die down. Sixth, she said quietly, humanity will share our gravity manipulation technology with the Council. Not weapons, but power generation, transportation, and construction applications. This technology will revolutionize your civilizations. That got their attention. The Council had seen what human technology could do. The promise of accessing even a portion of it was incredibly tempting. The Velcris ambassador stood, its crystalline form rigid with pride. The Velcris Imperium will not submit to these terms. We will not allow a species we deemed unworthy to dictate our future. We refuse. Xiang Wu looked at Admiral Ji Wang Kang, who had accompanied the diplomatic delegation. She nodded and activated a display showing a nearby star system. It was empty, except for a single unstable star that had been marked for scientific observation. This is the Kelvin system, Ji Wang explained. No planets, no habitation. Watch. A human ship appeared near the star. It fired a single weapon. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the star began to collapse, its fusion reactions disrupted by a carefully calibrated gravitational pulse. Within minutes, the star had compressed into a black hole. The council chamber fell absolutely silent. We call it the collapse weapon, Ji Wang continued. We can destabilize any star within range. We won't, of course, because we're not monsters. But we could. Remember that when you consider your response to our terms. The Velcris ambassador sat down, its crystalline surface dimmed with what might have been fear. Councillor Yun Quan, serving as humanity's cultural representative, stood to address the assembly. She was fourth generation, old enough to remember the stories of Earth, but young enough to be entirely void-born in spirit. You made a mistake 200 years ago, she said. You feared us because we survived when we should have died. You called us dangerous because we adapted when others failed. You exiled us because you could not control us. She walked around the council chamber, making eye contact with each ambassador. But here's what you didn't understand then, and are only beginning to understand now. Humanity's strength isn't that we survive. It's that we thrive in adversity. You gave us the worst conditions imaginable, and we turned them into our greatest advantage. June stopped in front of the Velcris seat. You tried to erase us from the galaxy. Instead, you gave us the crucible we needed to become something greater than we were. So I say this to you and to all the council. Thank you. Thank you for your cruelty. It made us into gods among the stars. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The council understood the message. Humanity wasn't asking for a place at the table. They were taking it, and the council had no power to stop them. Over the next week, the negotiations continued. Some species accepted the terms immediately, eager for human technology and protection. Others resisted, clinging to old pride. But one by one, they all agreed that the Velcris Imperium held out the longest. They had been the architects of humanities. Exile and accepting human authority was a bitter pill. But the memory of that collapsing star loomed over every discussion. Finally, they signed. The formal ceremony took place in the council chamber. All 17 original members and humanity signed the Dominion Accords. It was broadcast across the galaxy, a moment of historic transformation. Xiang Wu gave the closing address. Today marks the beginning of a new era. An era where exile is recognized as the crime it always was. An era where survival is respected rather than feared. An era where humanity stands as equals among the stars. He paused, looking at each council member. We could have returned with vengeance. We could have punished you for what was done to us. But that's not who we are. We are builders, survivors, and now we are your partners in shaping the future. As the ceremony concluded, Era approached the Tellian counselor privately. Your people opposed the exile. We remember that. The technology sharing agreement starts with you. Our engineers will arrive next month. The Tellian bowed in gratitude. We always knew the exile was wrong. I'm glad we were proven right, even if it took 2 centuries. Back in the Dead Zone, now officially renamed the Dominion Territories, celebrations erupted. The Voidborn had never seen themselves as victims, but they understood what had been accomplished. Their ancestors had been exiled to die. Instead, they had built an empire. G1 stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking out at the gravity wells that had shaped human destiny. 200 years ago, this place was supposed to be our grave. Now it's the capital of the strongest civilization in the galaxy. I wonder what the original exiles would think. Taiwan, who had stepped down as chancellor to focus on education, joined her. I think they'd be proud. They endured so we could thrive. They suffered so we could triumph. Every human alive today exists because they refused to give up. The galaxy had tried to remove humanity from the stage. Instead, they had created the dominant force in galactic politics. The exile had been meant as punishment, but became transformation. The dead zone had been meant as a grave, but became a fortress. Humanity had returned, not as the species the Council remembered, but as something new, something forged in the void, tempered by gravity and strengthened by 2 centuries of struggle. They were no longer just survivors. They were the Dominion, and the galaxy would never forget them again. The Council had learned the most important lesson. Never exile someone to hell unless you're certain they can't make it home.